this pandemic has changed the world and has also changed the way we live. Charles Hayes is with us today. What have you observed, about people's behavior? Are they changing their values and needs?
Some of the things that I've seen, both in terms of behavior and needs, both in China, but also by hearing from a lot of my colleagues around the world, found ourselves in a situation where we're in a very small amount of space in terms of mobility and having to figure out how to garner the resources just at a fundamental level to be able to eat, to be able to feel safe and protect oneself. We see this oscillation between consumption patterns that are literally about consuming for safety. In some places you see stockpiling of things, in other places it's about really thinking about the things that I know that I need, how ill-equipped you might be to have those things on hand and how dependent you are to be able to go out into the world to get them. That quickly shifted for many markets and many places into not just after someone's protected oneself, it shifted into kind of this focus on improvement. And so this notion of, I have time now to possibly take an online class. I have time to maybe continue my fitness regime at home by following a live streaming, class of indoor cycling. I have time to maybe learn a new language or spend more time with my family. And so this notion of self-improvement, of really focusing on growth and development, and thinking about what's truly meaningful to one's life. Actually, I've seen time and again people talk about how dramatic and fundamental that focus has been. And I think all of this focus on improvement and thinking about health and family and connections is starting to set a new set of expectations that consumers have of brands, of availability of products and services, of speed and just-in-time relevance. A company here in China has been focusing on helping on the improvement side, or helping people learn to cook, for example, is Alibaba's Hema. So the Hema grocery store chain has actually developed a product line called 3Rs, which are ready to eat, ready to heat, and ready to cook. Recognizing not everyone's at the same level of proficiency in cooking, but that many people are having to address this at home and figure out how to deal with it. New business opportunities are coming out of enabling people to do things for themselves and empower them in new ways. I think there's also a really interesting shift in identity. Pre-COVID, we were able, and to some degree, to control, certainly from a private and personal and public and professional setting, we were able to compartmentalize or control our identities. We were able to go to a work environment where there were established rules of what professionalism and interaction meant in the workplace. We were able to come home and kind of take that identity off and relate to our partners or our families in a different way. Now we all know that the biggest source of stress is figuring out what virtual background to put behind you that accurately represents and balances both your personal and your professional identity, right? That's been really challenging for a lot of people when you have to broadcast from your home to collaborate with people and communicate and get work done. When you have family members there, when you're taking care of children. How many people have heard a dog barking in the background of, a call that you did last week, right? It's going to be really interesting to see how the changing norms that have just been a constraint that's forced us to live this way might become something that we get more used to, more comfortable with, and more understanding how we might be able to fluidly move between identities. The third one was around, on a very personal level, coming to terms with this notion of constant change. And again, this is not a new idea, but if anything, I always say that I feel COVID has been as much an accelerant to things we've already been looking at as it has been, revealing completely new things to us. It's forced us to fast forward in many cases by months or years in terms of our thinking. And so change is a constant, something that I think we have to get used to in a way that we didn't realize was so critical. And change creates a lot of instability. People don't necessarily always welcome and want change. I mean, predictability, stability, actually are really important tenets of feeling safe. Change isn't just about physical safety and dealing with your immediate environment and how you move from A to B. It's about emotional well-being. It's about mental health. And actually recognizing those are as important to take care of, and that maybe some of the new muscles we're going to have to get comfortable using all of the time around agility, around flexibility and adaptability, around a new kind of resilience that you don't have to dig deep in, once a year to reinvent yourself, but that might be happening at a more constant rate. And so a lot of people are trying to understand, as you said, Ada, who am I? What is my purpose? And how do I not only take care of myself holistically, but how do I make sure I'm relevant in my ability to earn money, lead a purposeful life, and have a purposeful job. We also saw, I think, a very strong rise in, as you say, bottom-up, kind of hyper-engaged public. Hyper-engaged because this pandemic has exposed a lot of the really, as many people have mentioned, systemic challenges of our time, and where our systems are kind of breaking or cracking around the edges and can't deal either with the volume or the overwhelming, nature of such a serious pandemic. And so people are demanding more transparency, want to understand more and get more information and understand that it's accurate, that it's trustworthy. Where do you turn in an era where there is so much data and so much information, and often it conflicts with each other? So how do you actually look to trusted sources, and how do you rely on, I think in this case, leaders to help guide the way? A lot of people have been looking for leadership in many different aspects of life. And I think in many ways, a lot of the failures that we've seen, or breakdowns that we've seen, have been crises of leadership, of maybe leaders not making decisions, or making decisions that might be more in the interest of a short-term business. But a lot of these decisions are actually, I would argue, in the coming years, what will define not only the careers of those leaders, but define what the brands and the businesses of this next kind of decade stand for. And so when leaders get up and make kind of proactive statements around new policy, or ways they are going to treat their employees or support local communities, it says a lot, and it communicates a lot about their philosophy and their purpose beyond quarterly earnings or any of those things.
We also see a lot of good things happening in our communities. People have been really very kind, and they do a lot of things to support each other. There's a lot of goodwill. Do you see that in Shanghai, in China? And how could we continue that? How could we leverage that goodwill and resources in the community?
What I saw in Shanghai, particularly in the early days, was a quick and rapid kind of galvanizing of very local communities, meaning a single high-rise building and everyone who lived in it, right? For example, and people coming together to use platforms like WeChat to communicate with each other in the building, to find out who might not be able to go out and actually purchase groceries, or do some of the, or was in need of something that they didn't have. So some of this kind of group buying and collective kind of pulling together. And for those that were healthy, that had means to transportation, they were the ones that kind of put their hands up in some of these office blocks and say, let me collect on behalf of everyone. We saw a lot of last mile delivery, impromptu delivery set up, where just shelving units outside of buildings were just literally just set up so that delivery could be placed outside, to remove that kind of restriction of delivery people kind of coming into buildings. Actually, the local pharmacy becoming this new community hub where, local pharmacists who have kind of a first name basis with a lot of the people who come in regularly to their stores, actually reaching out again through WeChat and other platforms, and going and visiting homes to deliver medications. This is something we talked about, in the 50s and 60s in the US, was, the local community and the local drugstore and the local restaurant, and knowing people by first names and being able to leave your package there and trust it. And all of that, I just saw that come back very quickly, and it was quite powerful to see.
More people working remotely. We hear that Google is asking all their employees to work remotely in the next 6 months, or into next year.
I think we're headed into a world that isn't binary, as in it's either remote working or working in offices. I think we're going to head toward a spectrum where maybe those are two ends of the spectrum. I don't even know if maybe those are the ends. They're definitely part of it. Not just of workspace, but work style will kind of get blurred together in really interesting ways, I think. What actually needs to be done physically in a purpose-built space, and what can be done in other ways. And there's a lot of creativity that then can come into this, because it isn't necessarily mandated by one organization in terms of how they design their corporate offices for a certain kind of culture and a certain kind of collaboration, and everyone kind of needs to conform to that. Now what you have are, for a large populations around the world, everyone working from home and coming up with their own version of what work style and workspace looks like. And I think a lot of that bottom-up insight around how people want to work and quite frankly might demand to work will start to influence and shape where that work gets done and how businesses respond to supporting that.
We see some kind of corporate collectivism. Would that sustain, or do you see this as a fleeting thing?
They've done some great things, and I think they're just hinting at the possibility for the long term, in absence of such a dramatic pandemic, that could create new business value. And I hope that enough leaders actually see that collectivism that way. When we talk about corporate collectivism, I think what we're talking about, are businesses that have been able to figure out a way to work with other businesses, maybe without an obvious and explicit direct incentive to their business of today. Going back to the Alibaba and Hema example, but this also is relevant to JD.com. It's relevant to retailers in the US like Kroger and Walmart. A lot of companies, there are some great examples of companies who have actually taken on and employed part-time or temporarily large groups of people in the workforce that have been displaced by and unemployed because of COVID. So typically in the hospitality sectors, hotels, restaurants, et cetera, where they've been able to create digital platforms and been able to provide delivery jobs and other kinds of jobs for people that don't have work. This notion of challenging conventional employment contracts, shifting nature of flex work, and how people might be able to actually find more meaning in doing multiple things within a year or within a month or a day, as opposed to the same thing over and over again, and how that might help them grow and also, ironically, even be maybe more efficient in the long term for businesses as they collaborate in that way. You even have some traditional competitors, and this is more kind of to benefit society, but coming together. You have companies like Google and Apple, who announced that partnership to actually provide an interoperable Bluetooth infrastructure to help actually track the spread of COVID, right? And so this is where you see the true power of when these giants get together and combine forces, what can really happen and how it can really unlock and enable and support large parts of society. More of this kind of collaboration, more of this willingness to kind of be a bit more open source, I guess, with some of these ideas, can certainly lead to some really interesting new opportunities and new value.
How do you see, design thinking helping us to frame this very VUCA world? What are your clients telling you? What are your observations?
The conversation typically starts with the important need to recognize that we don't know what we don't know. The traditional industry lenses can actually be quite a challenge to opening your eyes to a different way of seeing where disruption can come from, right? And so I think, again, design thinking encourages that kind of open-ended kind of questioning. It shouldn't stop there, though. I think what you fill that with when you give yourself as a leader, as a company, a permission to take a step back, you fill that with looking at the market more closely, putting your ear to the ground, looking to analogous situations and understanding and sense making the things that are going on, not just in your company or in your industry, but out there in the world that might point to new ideas, new ways of doing things. And once you start to do that, a lot was talked about around empathy earlier today as well. I think that if anything, COVID has been probably the largest single global empathy exercise the world's ever experienced. I think almost everyone has some form of experience that they've gone through that helps them understand what empathy actually is really about. That's what we try to do with a lot of our clients, is take them on that journey to going into the worlds of the people they're trying to serve and the cultures they're trying to build, and understand where a new starting point might need to take place. And then, of course, there are a number of ways to deploy other aspects of design thinking and making surfacing those needs and turning those into ideas that you can make tangible and prototype and test and get feedback on. There was co-creation panel previously. So many of those things then come as a response to that, which is where it gets exciting in terms of new opportunities and new ways to create kind of a better future for everyone. I think that, no doubt e-learning has, grown quite a bit in the last 6 months. Many of the platforms have, benefited from much higher levels of subscriptions and engagement and that sorts of thing, because it was kind of the only option. I think that in and of itself will force innovation. You have a whole set of insights and data that comes from this, this growth of participation in online learning platforms. And for those that actually understand the data science behind how to look at that, it can only make those products kind of better and richer over time. And so I think that's something that we're going to see accelerate. I also think that one of the things, and it kind of links back to, it links back a little bit to the reskilling too, is that for a while now, IDEO's been talking about this notion of lifelong learning, and learning not being kind of time boxed into these specific life stages and there are reasons why it needs to take place at certain stages, and there are regulations in place that prevent it from not being so. But the reality is, with the speed at which the world is changing, and the dynamics in which we all have to figure out what we want to do for a living, how we want to show up, and how we want to engage the world, learning can never stop. And so I think this e-learning component has really shown a way to create wider access to that learning, more affordable access to that learning, and more time-specific or time-sensitive or just-in-time access to that learning. And all of those, I think, are tenets of what great, learning for the 21st century is going to need to be about. I think it might need to be broken up differently so that it becomes more relevant at the times you need it. And I think that what you learn will need to change more often than it ever has. I think the other thing I would say is on a kind of a K through 12 level, I've talked to many of my colleagues in the IDEO office who have said that we cannot underestimate the importance of the parent in that Zoom call, or to enable that child to be able to engage with the teacher virtually, and then the parent juggling work and trying to mentor the child, and that ecosystem and the relationship between parents, administrators, children, and educators could never be more important to kind of maybe reestablish some of the boundaries and how that interactivity takes place.
But in the digital world, with Google Meets being the key channel for teaching my kid now, I'm really worried that will be a norm in the future. I worry that they forget what it means to have empathy with one another, and how we as designers living in the current world be able to help them remember that it's still the most important thing when they grow up to be adults.
I always think about health system is not only limited to those services in the hospital or at the outpatient clinic. When you see around those workers who are delivering the food for you when you are homebound, those who are cleaning the street up for you, and also about how to educate the people through the online system from different activists, teacher, and also health workers. You know that the so-called the public health system is penetrating into different corners of the community, and this is the point of to build a sustainable society that can move on after this COVID. I think nowadays to provide immediate solution is much easier and faster than before. One thing is because we have a unified goal, try to overcome the barricades that all the people around the world is facing, that is COVID-19. I think through the internet and also through the so-called open public space, we can link up with different people with different expertise. I think through the internet and also through the so-called open public space, we can link up with different people with different expertise. The only thing is how we can really understand the need of the people that we want to help. And through this new dynamic of the platform, I think a lot of things can be done outside the traditional social sector platform or the government level platform. Only thing is we really have to take action and not just think, but take action.
And I think there was this understanding across parties in government, across people, that we were, experimenting. We had no idea what we were doing. We just had to, follow the numbers, help each other out. And I think design thinking in this situation, where, as Charles mentions, it's this constant change. We have a toolbox. We have an approach. We have methodology. We have a way to work in this unknown, to navigate in it, to try things out, to prototype, to test. And I think these are that's powerful to bring into the conversation, where everyone is, out there experimenting and trying things out and making mistakes. So
some of the fundamental tenets of design thinking is reframing mistakes, because we are deliberately designing for mistakes so that we could learn.
I think this is the first time people are feeling it, that whether it's actually from a design perspective, that I think how we actually develop solutions for all. I think in the business world, we tend to focus on which are the market segment or the user segment that will generate the quickest return for business sustainability. But I think this is a time where we realize that all tools and solutions are actually available for all. And I guess in my role in the digital world, in the technology world, I think collaboration is actually a lot easier.
So I think you have to be positive and stay positive. Of course, you have to practice your no blame culture, and then they were just doing any brainstorms.
That behind process and maybe a deeper level of what the meaning of design thinking tries to advance is this notion of how we can, much more on a human level, understand one another, be curious about what's going on, try to make sense of the things around us, recognize our own vulnerabilities and our own assumptions and hypotheses, and learn to be as highly adaptive and as open and as collaborative as we can.